What does preservation mean to me? Preservation means doing all the things that are necessary to keep the past in the present.
So I guess generally speaking, preservation would be to maintain the authenticity of an idea, concept, a person, individual, place.
It means recognizing the contributions of history, of people, and allowing their contributions to ring and resound hereafter.
To me, it means like cherishing and saving something for maybe others to see or for others to learn about.
So that's what historical preservation is. It's life. You can't separate that from life and living. It's a crucial part of our existence.
Welcome to Miami Preserves, the podcast where we explore historic places in Miami and what it means to preserve our history. I'm your host, Lucia Meneses, and I'm also the School Programs Manager at Dade Heritage Trust, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving Miami's architectural, environmental, and cultural heritage through advocacy, education, and preservation. So far, we've learned a little bit about Miami's Black history. We heard from teachers and students and how they are navigating the changes and politics surrounding Black history in Florida. We've also touched on some early preservation efforts in Miami, but in this episode, I wanted to dive deeper into the concept of preservation. I want to know how preservation might impact residents, especially in historic Black neighborhoods, and why is it so difficult to preserve historic places in Miami?
Well, preservation is challenging, I think, for the most part in Miami because of how quickly Miami evolves.
That's Christine Rupp, or Chris, Executive Director of Dade Heritage Trust. Chris is originally from Ohio, but moved to Miami in 1993, and I can confidently say that she knows Miami better than most locals. She's been working with DHT as the director since 2016, so she knows a thing or two about preservation when it comes to Miami. Why is it so hard to preserve in Miami?
When you're in a community and people there are born and raised in that community, they tend to have an affinity toward these symbols of history or historic places. When you have all of these people coming from everywhere, their sense of home and sense of history generally lies somewhere else. So as an organization, we try to help people learn about where they live through bike tours, walking tours, our education program, because you can't expect people to care about something unless they know about it. Secondly, obviously, it's property values, right? So when someone might live in a house that they feel could be designated, and yet someone swoops in and says, look, I'm going to give you so much money for your house so I can tear it down, that might be appealing to someone.
According to Chris, this is happening all over the city, but especially in historically Black and brown neighborhoods like Brownsville, Overtown, Allapattah, West Coconut Grove, and Liberty City. The land is more affordable and sits at a higher elevation, which is something people are starting to pay attention to as sea levels rise. Let's go back for a minute to the idea of historic designation. When a building is designated, that means it has been formally classified as having historical, cultural, or architectural significance. This often protects a building from being demolished, but not always.
We just had a situation where a very significant historic building in Little Haiti, which used to be known as Lemon City, the office of one of Miami's earliest doctors, Dr. Dupuy, he had his office and a pharmacy on Northeast 2nd Avenue, and that was demolished. We're still trying to figure out exactly what happened, but those things still happen.
So just to be clear, that was designated, that was locally designated, and yet it was still demolished. So how does that happen? How do you explain that?
Well, we're trying to figure that all out right now. So my understanding is that the building was deemed an unsafe structure. It had fallen into disrepair for many years. The disrepair isn't anything new. The property owners were obligated to restore and repair that building and adaptively reuse it. I think the use was going to be a gallery, but they ran into a situation with Miami-Dade County and whoever oversees the streets that the original arcade was now not code compliant.
Just to clarify, an arcade is an architectural feature that consists of a series of arches supported by columns with a covered roof. It's one of the features that made this building so unique.
And so then the property owners were trying to work with the city of Miami and the county to figure something out. In the midst of all of that bureaucratic levels, the building started failing and it was demolished.
Losing this building, though, means we've lost every contributing historic structure associated with Lemon City's rural origins, a neighborhood founded by Bahamian immigrants before Miami was even incorporated. It was later renamed Little Haiti due to the influx of Haitian immigrants and their cultural influence. And its close proximity to downtown and the Wynwood Arts District has made it tremendously valuable to developers, despite being one of Miami's most impoverished neighborhoods. It also sits at a higher elevation, making it less prone to flooding. The property owners Chris is referring to, who were obligated to restore the building, are developers for the new Magic City Innovation District.
A strong show of opposition to a project that aims to transform a big chunk of Miami's Little Haiti neighborhood. CBS 4's Hank Tester is live in Little Haiti with a look at what's at stake.
Little Haiti's not for sale! Little Haiti's not for sale! Magic City has got to fail! Magic City has got to fail!
Residents and community activists say the development will change Little Haiti forever.
Little Haiti is at the center of this new billion-dollar development plan, spread out over 17 acres, that will include residential, commercial, office, and entertainment spaces. According to Magic City developers, they fully intended to restore and adaptively reuse the building. Yet the building continued to deteriorate and sat neglected for years after they purchased it.
It's called demolition by neglect, and there are penalties for that. But again, if the property owner details the fact that they were repeatedly trying to reach out to the city and the county for assistance on what to do, and there was no cooperation or no answer, then who's at fault? That gets back to my points when you asked about the challenges of preservation, having proper staffing to occasionally at least do site visits for sites within the city of Miami that are historically designated. Same goes for the county.
Chris explained that there has been tremendous turnover in the city government. In her time at DHT alone since 2016, she has worked with numerous preservation officers, city planners, and park directors.
And so to be able to put together a cohesive plan and a relook at these neighborhoods requires some consistency with staff and consistency with government. So with everything in so much turmoil, I think it's difficult for department heads to really focus on the long term. That's what I believe, but these discussions need to be happening, not just for preservation's sake, but for the residents' sake as well.
Clearly, saving historic buildings is more sustainable and cost-effective, but how does historic designation directly impact residents? In the first episode, you heard from Megan McLaughlin from Pluserbia Design. DHT hired her team to conduct a variety of surveys in historic neighborhoods such as Shenandoah, Silver Bluff, Allapattah, Brownsville, and Liberty City. In historic preservation, a survey is a documentation of a neighborhood, which allows you to identify places that are eligible for historic designation. Here's Megan to expand on how historic designation might benefit the neighborhood of Brownsville.
I think on the part of Pluserbia and Dade Heritage Trust, I think the goal first and foremost has always been about getting the information out there, because from there, if you get enough people excited, then maybe some actual advocacy and maybe policy changes could take place. So I think particularly in the case of Brownsville, there was certainly a community push for this to evolve perhaps into a historic district or perhaps into a National Register historic district, which would give recognition to the neighborhood. If, let's say, the neighborhood was to be listed on the National Register of Historic Places, that doesn't really affect local building permitting. So people could still tear down houses in the neighborhood. Homeowners themselves could still change their house, change out their roof and change their windows and things of that nature. But what it does do is, one, brings recognition, and two, if there were any kind of federal funded projects that might take place in the neighborhood, it would require an extra level of scrutiny and also proof that whatever that government-funded project was, it wouldn't negatively affect the neighborhood.
Megan went on to say how Brownsville and other historically Black neighborhoods like Overtown and Liberty City have been victims of federally funded projects negatively impacting the neighborhoods. Public housing built throughout these neighborhoods in the 1950s and 60s was not well maintained by the government. Neighborhoods were overcrowded, especially after the construction of I-95, which displaced so many Overtown residents.
So I think government policies can have negative impacts on communities. Unfortunately, they tend to have an outsized impact on communities of color, minority neighborhoods, or just low-income neighborhoods that might not have the voice to speak out. So I think a community knowing its history, knowing its value, and being organized to speak out is a beneficial thing.
I asked Chris what the ultimate goal is with these surveys, aside from valuable documentation. Is it to create a historic district?
100%. That would be Dade Heritage Trust's ultimate goal. And along with education, too. I mean, we're educating the residents of the neighborhoods about where they live, the place they call home. But obviously, Dade Heritage Trust is in line with those residents that don't like to see wholesale change in their neighborhoods. We like to call these homes sugar cubes that go up and replace the original residences that were there. And the only way a neighborhood can do that is really through historic district designation.
Here's where it can get a little confusing. There are different types of historic designation, federal and local. And when it comes to designating homes, there are a lot of misconceptions about what residents can and cannot do to their homes. Chris breaks that down.
So historic designation does impact what a resident can and can't do with their property. On a federal level, absolutely no impact. And there's nobody coming down from Washington, D.C. to say you can't paint your house orange, So the federal designation is more of an honorary designation. The real teeth is with local designation. But let's say you have a 1920s home and you want to add on, or you want to change the windows, or you want a new roof. Historic preservation does not freeze your residence in time. Okay. But what it does do is it assures that architectural integrity of your home remains. So you can do anything that you want to on the inside of your home. It doesn't matter. But it's really the exterior facade that the Historic Preservation Department would be concerned with. And of course, in certain historic districts, there are design guidelines. So you have to stay within a color palette if you want to paint your home. Like if you had a barrel tile roof, you can't replace it with a shingle roof or a metal roof. So these are the kinds of things that you have to work around if you designate. But again, that assures you that your house is going to maintain that architectural integrity.
These design guidelines that homeowners have to abide by if they choose to designate their historic home may seem severe to some people, or like a violation of your property rights as an American. But we already have zoning laws, for example, that prevent people from replacing their single-family home with, let's say, an apartment building or a 5-story vertical mansion. Homeowners have to obtain permits to do all kinds of work in their homes, designated or not. So these design guidelines are not so different from current laws and restrictions already in place.
The other thing it does, I think this really nailed it. It was someone I was speaking to who actually owned an historic home, and they designated it. And this is how they felt about their home. They said, I'm here. I'm the caretaker of this museum for right now. And I'm going to assure that it stays as it is, as a symbol of our community's heritage. And the next owner will also be the caretaker of this home. And so I thought that was a beautiful way to think about owning an historic home, that you're assuring that it's there, that it will be lovingly cared for.
It's easy to get discouraged when you constantly witness the lack of respect for Miami's historical assets, like the Dupuy building mentioned earlier. Which is why it's so important to focus on the good work being done, even if it's on a small scale. At DHT, we have witnessed the positive impact that restoration and preservation can have on a community through our Preservation of Naturally Occurring Housing Program, or NOAA. Through a county grant, DHT has purchased 3 apartment buildings in Little Havana, a working-class neighborhood best known for the large number of Cuban exiles who resided there in the 1960s. We purchase, restore, and designate these historic apartment buildings, but more importantly, we preserve their affordability.
Now our commitment here at CBS 4 to bring you stories that help you navigate the housing crisis zeroes in on Little Havana, where the Dade Heritage Trust is finding a balance between preserving history and providing affordable housing.
Through our preservation of naturally occurring affordable housing program, we purchased a building that we knew had an unsafe structure violation on it. And the reason we purchased it was because it offered affordable housing. And that is something that Dade Heritage Trust has leaned into. We are buying historic buildings that offer affordability mainly because they're in such bad condition and the landlord doesn't charge a lot for rent because he doesn't improve the buildings. And so we've been able to purchase 3 buildings in Little Havana that offer this affordable housing. The one that we purchased with an unsafe structure violation on it, we know if we didn't purchase it, it would have been torn down and replaced by market rate housing, therefore displacing more people in Miami who are in need of a place to live. And so we've been working with the City of Miami's Unsafe Structure Department now for well over a year to remedy that unsafe structure violation.
So while that does sound tedious, right?
It is.
It is still more affordable, right, than tearing down and rebuilding new?
Sure. We've proven that purchase and restoration of these historic structures is more financially reasonable by about $60,000 to $70,000 per unit for a 1-bedroom unit versus building new affordable housing. The other positives about this program is that we preserve the architectural integrity of the neighborhood. We've found that in the building that we've completed in Little Havana, it's really had a positive impact on the surrounding properties. All the properties that are contiguous to us have been fixed up. So we're having an impact there. It also drives a sense of pride within the tenants. Like they believe, oh, wow, somebody really cares about us. And they're proud of living where they do now because the building is so beautiful. So that's the other really great thing about restoring these older buildings.
Preserving historic buildings is not merely an act of nostalgia. It's a moral imperative. In the last episode, you heard a snippet of a poem by Miami-based poet Gary Allen called History Shouldn't Be a Mystery. The poem was inspired by the discovery of cemeteries in recent years throughout Florida and how developers have been building over burial grounds for a long time. Gary also took inspiration from his aunt, Dr. Enid Pinkney, and her preservation efforts to save the unmarked Black cemetery in Lemon City, which you heard about in episode 1. Here's the second half of that poem.
It's time to stop the cover-up and the hiding of bones. May the voices of the forgotten finally be known. Tell their stories to the youth. No more lies. It's time to build upon truth. Face our fears and deal with the pain. Remember from whence we came and stop building pretty buildings on top of our shame. It's time. It's time to walk in faith, love, not hate, make peace before it's too late. Tear down the walls that divide. Forgive one another, lay aside the pride, and put the pieces of the puzzle in place. Fragmented memories, emotions displaced. It's time to restore dignities to the families that cry out from the pain. Remember Lemon City, Bowlestown, Knightsville, and Nazarene. Lincoln Memorial, Westview, Zion, Silver Green. Clearwater Heights, Pauper Cemetery, Lawnwood, and Evergreen. In every abandoned graveyard where the voices of the dead scream. Remember the price they paid, the sacrifices they made. Honor their lives and voices that cry out from the grave. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. Until there's justice, the crying won't cease. Let's celebrate their legacies and don't leave them out. From the rooftop we shout. No more left out and left behind. No more left out and left behind should be etched in our minds and recorded in the annals of history. Today we shine light on darkness for the world to see and never ever forget that history shouldn't be a mystery.
More often than not, we blame the developers for destroying historic sites. But in my conversation with Gary, he told me that he believes the developer is not entirely to blame. And he has an interesting perspective on the concept of a developer.
So when they're developing and they see this, why do they ignore it? You know, how can they say that they didn't see the bones? It's a cover-up, but I think that's how we can't just, now that I think about it, we can look at the developers and point fingers at the developers. But how many of us are really developers ourselves? It's like in the poem, it says, have we become so concerned about climbing the corporate ladder and getting our pockets fatter? So it's this greed, it's this drive for success. It's inside all of us, though. The developer, when you really look at it, that's a symbol of us when we decide to build our lives up on something that's hidden underneath. How many of us, we all do it, and we've all done it. We're building our lives up on something that's unresolved. And that's what the developers is a representation of that, or a picture of that. Like, here comes the developers, they're gonna build up on top of it. Here's us, it's like, I know this happened to me when I was a kid and I went through all of this, but I'm gonna build my life up on top of that.
When you tear down and build new, not only does all the material end up in a landfill, but the people who live in and around the home or building, more often than not, are displaced or priced out. Neighborhood demographics inevitably change, but the stories are still there. The bones are still there, as Gary might say. Little Havana is still Little Havana, even though the majority of its residents today are Central and South Americans. But that's not the case in every neighborhood. Alapata, for instance, is known as Little Santo Domingo for the strong Dominican presence in the neighborhood. There you'll find Dominican hair salons, food, music, and culture. But Chris told me that the neighborhood has recently been upzoned by the city, allowing for taller and denser development projects to come in and essentially wipe out the cultural fabric and further displace working class people.
We have Little Haiti, right? Which is being decimated because of new development. And if city planners could say, time out, let's look at the culture of this neighborhood, the food, the art, the music, and help this neighborhood become a tourist draw, that will really influence the residents, and everybody will rise up and embrace that culture. So I think it's poor planning in terms of embracing the cultural diversity that we have here in the name of real estate development. Because if planners, investors look at the success of Little Havana, that could be replicated.
Chris explained that there's still hope in historic Black neighborhoods like Brownsville and Liberty City, where many of the original buildings are still intact, several of which are historically significant, such as the Hampton House and Georgette's Tea Room, which was like a bed and breakfast for Black entertainers and community activists in the 40s and 50s. One thing everyone I spoke to agrees with is the importance of education, or at least that education is a good place to start.
And what I like to say is that buildings don't lie. So when you're going to the Black Police Precinct and Courthouse Museum that was constructed because of segregation, that included a jail and courthouse only for African Americans, you can't make that up. That's why that building was constructed. Same thing for the Hampton House. It was constructed as a Green Book motel for African American travelers. So buildings don't lie.
I asked historian and preservation advocate Dr. Enid Pinkney, who you heard from in previous episodes, why preserving African American history is so important to her.
It's important to me because I feel neglected and disrespected. I feel that whatever we do is discounted. So I cannot depend on anybody else to celebrate the Black accomplishment. That we have to learn how to celebrate it ourselves and teach our young people of what has transpired and to educate them so they can be proud of the heritage that is theirs. And no matter what somebody thinks of you, you think highly of yourself. And that's what I got out of growing up in Overtown, because it was all Black, and I was given that opportunity to function and to be proud of what I did. I was president of the student council at Booker T. Washington High School. I took a picture with Joe Louis. And, I've just been exposed to so much. I've been doing so much integration and learning how to accept all people and not hold anything against people. So I'm free. I'm free And I want other people to feel free, to feel significant, to feel that they can make accomplishments, outstanding accomplishments. It's all there for you. Just take it on and be willing to fight the battle.
This was recorded in November 2023. Sadly, Enid passed away a few months later at age 92. As former president of Dade Heritage Trust, Enid was passionate about preserving the history of Miami's Black experience. She was instrumental in preserving the historic Hampton House, the Miami Circle, the Lemon City Cemetery, and so many other places throughout Miami-Dade. She will be deeply missed, but her legacy will live on in our hearts. In this podcast, we set out to redefine what preservation means in a city that is constantly evolving with development that threatens our historical assets. I think Crystal, a local teacher you heard from in a previous episode, sums it up perfectly.
So for me, preserving, it's a lot because I love history, and for me, it's a legacy. And it's a legacy that I'm proud of. And legacies are important because it gives you confidence. It gives you confidence. It gives you strength to know where you came from, and also insight to where you're going. That's what I teach from day one. In order to know where you're going, there is nothing new under the sun, absolutely nothing. It has been done before. So just go back in history and you can learn so much. So one of my favorite quotes is from Maya Angelou, and it says, "History, despite its retching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, it need not be lived again." So preservation for me is educational. That key word is courage though. So we'll see moving forward how much courage we have.
Thank you for listening to Miami Preserves. This was the last episode of the first season. I hope you all liked it. Hopefully, we will bring you more episodes in the future. Miami Preserves is produced by me, Lucia Meneses, with sound engineering and editing by Forrest Kennedy. The views expressed by the speakers on this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Dade Heritage Trust, its board of directors, or its members. Special thanks to the Wolfson Family Foundation for sponsoring this project. Thank you to all the guests featured in today's episode: Christine Rupp, Megan McLaughlin, Gary Allen, Dr. Enid Pinkney, Maribel, Crystal, Emily, Dr. Marvin Dunn, and Terrence Cribbs-Laurent. Our theme music is called Presence by Taylor Vega and performed by the YMU Jazz Collective. To learn more about Dade Heritage Trust and for a complete transcript of episodes, visit our website, dadeheritagetrust.org. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Miami Preserves podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. If you liked this podcast, please take a moment to leave us a review and tell other people about it on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at DHT Miami. Thanks.
A cycle is a cycle of life. What's the name of that thing? Lion King? Is that
I was going to say Lion King, but I thought, no, it's not Lion King.
Is that, they said the cycle of life, right?
The circle of life. It's the circle of life.
So it has to happen. That circle has to happen. So we have to preserve those stories because it's life itself. So that's what historical preservation is. It's life. You can't separate that from life and living. It's life, and it's a crucial part of our existence.
I love that.
Yeah. God. Where did that come from?
Bones.
See, remember what I said earlier is what's in you is already in you?
I hope that this comes out good.
Yeah, and your voice sounds good on the mic.
Good.
Yes.
Bones.
Deal with those bones out there.
Dee-dee-dee. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee.